Viking Blood Eagles, the sacrifice ritual that terrorized the North. Dusk settles over a misty battlefield. In the crimson light of sunset, a captured king is forced to his knees. His heart pounds as coarse ropes bite into his wrists. Around him stand grim-faced Norse warriors, their breaths fogging in the cold air. A hush falls. One warrior, eyes alight with a terrifying resolve, steps forward holding a gleaming blade. He rips open the defeated king's tunic, exposing bare skin to the chill. The captive's ragged breath quickens. In the silence, the only sound is the wind and the distant caw of ravens. Then, with ceremonial deliberation, the Viking raises his blade. The king's scream pierces the twilight as steel bites into flesh, carving a cruel symbol across his back. The Blood Eagle has begun, an ancient ritual of agony and awe, unfolding in all its horror. An age of fury and faith. The Viking world was one of stark contrasts. These Norsemen were not only raiders, but also farmers, traders, and explorers who settled new lands as far as Iceland and North America. Yet when they took up axe and sword, they earned a dreaded reputation. Contemporary evidence confirms that Vikings could be greedy and implacable foes, slavers and pillagers who reduced kingdoms to ruin. Monasteries burned, villages vanished. To the Christian peoples of Europe, the very name Viking evoked terror, a nightmare of horn-helmed marauders erupting from the sea without warning. In monastic chronicles, Viking raiders were likened to a plague or a punishment from God. Their atrocities recounted in horrified tones. Even among these brutal tales, some acts stood out as exceptionally gruesome. In 869, the East Anglian king Edmund was captured by a Danish army. According to legend, they tied him to a tree, scourged him, and used him for live target practice, shooting arrows into him until his body bristled like a hedgehog with quills. Such cruel deaths served a dark purpose: to spread fear. But no story of Viking cruelty would surpass the one that was whispered with a shudder throughout the North. A ritual execution so horrific that it hardly seemed real. It was called the Blood Eagle. A weathered Viking picture stone from Gotland, Sweden, depicts a mysterious scene. A man lying face down beneath a figure hacking at his back, while Odin's knot symbol, the Valknut, hovers above. Beside them, a bird of prey spreads its wings, a chilling hint that the Blood Eagle ritual might not be mere myth, but a part of Viking lore preserved in stone. This ancient carving suggests that even centuries before the sagas were written, the Norse may have envisioned, or witnessed, such a sacrificial killing to honor their gods and strike terror into the hearts of enemies. The Blood Eagle unveiled. To the Vikings, blood and iron were instruments of both war and worship. The Blood Eagle was a ghastly fusion of execution and sacrifice, a way to kill a foe so brutally that it doubled as an offering to the gods. According to later Norse sagas, this ritual was reserved for the most hated of enemies, often as revenge for a murdered father, or lorden.wikipedia.org. The victim was typically a person of high rank, a prince or king, making his fate a gruesome public spectacle. What exactly did the Blood Eagle entail? The descriptions that have come down to us are excruciating. First, the victim would be restrained, forced into a prone position, face down on the ground or a platform. smithsonianmag.com. Then, using a sharp weapon, the executioner would carve the shape of an eagle with outstretched wings into the man's back. This was only the beginning. With methodical savagery, the ribs were then hacked away from the spine, one by one, and brutally bent outward. Imagine the victim's back flayed open, the broken ribs splayed out to either side like the bloody pinions of a wing. The pain at this stage would be unimaginable. And, according to the stories, the victim was somehow kept alive through it all. Some accounts even say the Vikings would pour salt into the gaping wound, literally rubbing salt into the victim's exposed flesh to intensify the agony. Finally came the horrific climax. The executioner would reach into the crimson cavity of the back and pull out the lungs. In a ghastly tableau, the lungs were draped over the spread ribs so that they resembled quivering wings. Witnesses claimed that in those final moments, the dying man's lungs fluttered in the cold air, a last, shallow gasp giving the eerie impression of a pair of bloody wings flapping as life left his body. It is the stuff of nightmares, an execution designed to horrify. Little wonder that the Blood Eagle ritual was rare even in Norse lore. It appears explicitly in only a handful of texts. In fact, only 2 instances are clearly described in the surviving sagas. Yet, these 2 instances were enough to sear the Blood Eagle into legend. In both cases, the story is strikingly similar. A high-born victim is put to death by having an eagle carved into his back. And crucially, this is done to avenge a slain father. It is as if the Norse skalds, poets, who recorded these tales wanted to emphasize that this extreme cruelty was not arbitrary. It was reserved for the gravest of blood debts, a sacrificial retribution demanded by honor, vengeance, and the gods themselves.
My ancestors are waiting. I are ready.
Ragnar's Revenge, a king's agony. One of the most infamous Blood Eagle tales takes us to Anglo-Saxon England in the 9th century. The story begins with a legendary Viking hero, Ragnar Lothbrok, Ragnar Hairy Breeches, a fearsome Viking chieftain and scourge of France and England. Ragnar's exploits were the stuff of saga and song, but his legend truly took root in the manner of his death. Around the year 865, Ragnar was raiding in the kingdom of Northumbria when he was captured by its king, Ælla. Refusing to show fear, the defiant Ragnar was condemned to a pit of vipers. Imagine him, cast into darkness as venomous snakes writhed around his body. Ragnar, ever the warrior, is said to have laughed in the face of death even as the serpent's fangs pierced his skin. With his final breaths, Ragnar issued a chilling prophecy for King Ælla. "How the little pigs will grunt when they hear how the old boar suffered," he warned. It was a promise that his sons would avenge the cruel manner of his demise. And Ragnar was right.
When the young pigs hear how the old boar suffered, they will rush to the sty.
In 866, a great heathen host of Vikings, Ragnar's sons among them, invaded Northumbria, fueled by fury over their father's fate. Leading them was Ivar the Boneless, known to history as Ivar the Boneless, a man as cunning as he was ruthless. This Viking great army clashed with King Ælla's forces, and in 867, Ælla was captured in the aftermath of battle. Now the tables were turned. The stage was set for a dreadful revenge that would send a message echoing across the ages. On that grim day, King Ælla of Northumbria met a fate arguably worse than Ragnar's. The sagas say that Ivar and his brothers imposed the Blood Eagle upon Ælla to fulfill their father's vengeance. One can picture the scene. The captured king, perhaps already wounded, dragged to a makeshift altar of vengeance as Viking warriors formed a circle around him. Ivar the Boneless, cold-eyed and deliberate, would have presided over the ritual. There would be no quick death for the king who threw Ragnar to the snakes. Instead, before the solemn, unblinking gaze of the Norse gods, Ælla's back was carved open. The sagas recount it succinctly. They caused the bloody eagle to be carved on the back of Ælla, and they cut away all of the ribs from the spine, and then they ripped out his lungs. The English king's blood-curdling screams must have mingled with the exultant shouts of the Vikings as bone cracked and flesh was rent. According to one account, preserved by the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus, the avengers rejoiced as they cut the eagle into Ælla's back, marking him with the cruelest of birds. Not content with that, Saxo adds, with morbid detail, that they salted the mangled flesh of the king, rubbing salt into his wounds, both literally and figuratively. By the end, Ælla's ribcage was spread wide, his lungs pulled out and draped over his shoulders like gory wings. The old boar, Ragnar, had been avenged in a manner as savage as anyone could imagine. To the Vikings, this was not just revenge, but a sacred act. Some later historians argue that by inflicting the blood eagle on Ælla, Ragnar's sons were also offering the king as a sacrifice to Odin, the Allfather, god of war and slaughter. Odin's presence is hinted in these tales. After all, Odin's sacred beasts are the raven and the eagle, creatures that feed on the dead. Marking Ælla with an eagle could be seen as dedicating him to the ravenous god. The blood eagle thus served as a ferocious sacrificial ritual as much as an execution. Smithsonianmag.com. In saga lore, Ivar the Boneless emerges not only as an avenger, but as a high priest of carnage, offering up a king's life to appease the bloodlust of his gods and the soul of his slain father. When news of King Ælla's hideous end spread, it must have struck terror into the hearts of the Anglo-Saxons. This was a brutal age, but even in the 9th century, the sheer barbarity of the blood eagle would have been breathtaking. From the Northumbrian moors to the halls of kings in Wessex and Mercia, men would whisper of how Ragnar's sons made a sacrifice of their enemy. The great heathen army, having performed this dreadful rite, continued its campaigns. And indeed, their onslaught altered the course of English history, triggering wars that would eventually lead to King Alfred the Great's rise. But for years to come, the memory of Ælla's death served as a grim warning. Cross the Vikings, and one might suffer not just defeat, but a fate worse than death. A sacrifice to Odin in Orkney. The blood eagle was not a terror reserved solely for foreign kings. It also surfaced in the sagas as a tool of internal Viking feuds. Around the same era, far to the north in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, another drama of vengeance unfolded, one that likewise ended with rib bones splayed to the sky. The Orkneyinga Saga recounts how a Norwegian prince named Halfdan Halfdansson, called Halfdan Longleg, met his end at the hands of an Earl of Orkney known as Torf Einar. The saga's tale is one of betrayal and revenge within the Viking world. Halfdan Longleg was the son of Harald Fairhair, the first king of a unified Norway. In a ruthless bid for power, Halfdan and a brother treacherously ambushed and killed Earl Ragnvald of Møre, who happened to be Torf Einar's father, by burning him alive inside his hall. This murder sparked a blood feud. Einar, vowing to avenge his father, hunted the killers across land and sea until finally cornering Halfdan in Orkney. A fierce battle was fought, and Halfdan Longleg was captured by the vengeful Earl. What followed was another Blood Eagle, this time executed not upon a Christian king, but upon a fellow Norseman, a prince of royal blood. The saga spares no detail. It says that on the battlefield, once Halfdan was at Einar's mercy, Earl Einar performed a gruesome ritual. He carved an eagle on Halfdan's back in this fashion. He thrust his sword into the hollow at the backbone and cut apart all the ribs down to the loins and drew out the lungs. en.wikipedia.org. One can imagine Einar, still spattered with sweat and blood from combat, standing over his father's killer. In that moment, he was not merely an earl, but an instrument of divine retribution. As Halfdan Longleg gasped his last torturous breaths, Einar is said to have offered him up to Odin. The saga explicitly notes that Einar gave Halfdan to Odin for victory. In other words, the killing was consecrated as a sacrifice. The Blood Eagle's wings were the wings of Odin's eagle, and the victim's final breath, a tribute to the gods of war. This Orkney episode shows how deeply ritual and revenge intertwined in Viking lore. Even a son of King Harald Fairhair, the mighty conqueror of Norway, could be subjected to this pagan execution if he committed a grave enough crime. 4. Burning Ragnvald alive. Halfdan Longleg's punishment was to be ritually butchered, his own ribs cracked open as repayment. Here, too, the theme of avenging a father is front and center. Einar does to Halfdan what he believes will satisfy the honor of his slain father's spirit. And by invoking Odin, he frames the vengeance as part of the cosmic order of things, a holy justice rather than mere brutality. What must it have been like for those who witnessed Einar's act? The island winds whipping at their cloaks, the smell of salt and blood in the air, and on the ground, the prince's body grotesquely transformed. Ribs fanned out, lungs steaming in the cool Orkney air. One imagines a deathly silence among the onlookers, broken only by the gulls and the distant crash of waves. The message was unmistakable. Some betrayals would be repaid in pain 1,000-fold. Afterward, word of Halfdan's fate would have traveled on longships and merchant carts, spreading through the Norse settlements of the North Atlantic. It served both as a warning and a grim validation. A warning that no one, not even a king's son, was safe from the vengeance of the old ways, and a validation that Odin still accepted sacrifices in blood and agony when the cause was just. Wings of Terror. Fear as a weapon. In the lore of the Vikings, the Blood Eagle was more than an execution. It was psychological warfare at its most horrifying. The Norse were keenly aware of the power of terror. To maintain control over conquered lands, or to deter future rebellions, they sometimes chose to make examples of their enemies. A victim killed by ordinary means might be forgotten, but a victim subjected to the Blood Eagle would be remembered by all who heard the tale. The remains themselves, a body literally torn open, posed like a macabre sculpture, would have been a shocking sight for anyone who stumbled upon it. We can easily imagine messengers or survivors describing the carnage to distant courts. A king's ribs spread like wings, his organs draped outside his body. Such images would lodge in the mind, evoking not just revulsion, but a deep, visceral dread. Medieval chroniclers, particularly Christian monks, seized on these kinds of stories to paint the Vikings as demonic savages. In their writings, Viking rituals and tortures were evidence of the heathens' depravity. The Blood Eagle, in particular, sounded like a scene from the martyrs' lives, those gruesome accounts of saints tortured by pagans. Indeed, the eagle motif had special resonance. In Norse poetry, eagles and ravens were known as the beasts of battle, creatures that feasted on the corpses left after a fight. To cut an eagle on a foe's back was a sinister play on this image. It was as if the Vikings were saying, "We won't even wait for the carrion birds. We will be the carrion bird that devours you." It transformed the act of killing into a symbolic spectacle. The enemy wasn't just defeated, he was desecrated. His body literally turned into an object of terror and a tribute to death. Such theater of cruelty was intended to send an unmistakable message. When Ragnar's sons blood-eagled King Ælla, the implicit message to the world was, "This is what becomes of those who harm our own." When Torf Einar blood-eagled Halfdan, it proclaimed to friend and foe alike, no one murders an Orkney earl's kin and lives. The blood eagle was thus a form of communication, a grotesque letter carved in flesh, meant to be read far and wide. In an era without newspapers or rapid communication, stories were the medium of fear. The Vikings ensured that some stories, like that of King Ælla's agonizing demise, would spread on the tongues of bards and the whispers of traders. Fear would precede them wherever they went. Interestingly, the Norse themselves immortalized these acts in their poetry and art, which suggests that the blood eagle, while terrifying, also held meaning within their culture. A skaldic poem composed by Sighvatur Þórðarson in the early 11th century alludes to Ivar the Boneless carving an eagle on Ælla's back. The verse is cryptic, as skaldic poems often were, but later generations clearly understood it as a reference to the famous execution. This means that, at least in the Viking Age, the tale of Ælla's blood eagle was celebrated enough to be woven into the oral poetic tradition. Far from being hidden in shame, it was bragged about, proof of how far a Viking leader would go to avenge his father. For the Vikings hearing that poem, Ivar's act would have been seen as grimly heroic, an ultimate testament to familial duty and warrior honor. Still, one has to wonder, what did ordinary people feel when they heard of a blood eagle? Perhaps a young Viking warrior, eager for glory, felt a thrill, mingled with unease, at the ferocity of his leaders. A Christian monk in a distant monastery, penning the tale with shaking hands, likely felt horror and righteous disgust. And common folk, farmers, villagers, hearing these rumors by the fireside, must have felt a shiver of pure fear. The blood eagle achieved what all acts of terror seek to do. It made enemies lose heart. It painted the Vikings not merely as adversaries, but as almost otherworldly agents of destruction, capable of evils beyond the normal scope of war. Legend or reality? As the centuries passed, the blood eagle took on a life of its own in books and scholarly debates. Could such a monstrous ritual have truly been carried out? Or was it an exaggerated legend born of misunderstanding and propaganda? This question has tantalized historians and anatomists alike, leading to a vigorous debate about the line between history and myth in the Viking sagas. One school of thought argues that the blood eagle was likely a literary invention or misunderstanding rather than a routine historical practice. Scholars like Roberta Frank have noted that no contemporary 9th century Anglo-Saxon or Irish chronicle explicitly describes such a ritual. The detailed accounts we have come from sagas written hundreds of years later by Christian Icelanders. Frank famously suggested that what the saga writers did was mix up poetic metaphors and heroic legends into a grandiose torture that may never have actually occurred. She pointed out, for example, that early Norse poetry often used kennings, metaphorical phrases, about eagles and ravens tearing at the backs of the slain on battlefields. It's possible the saga authors took these poetic images of carrion birds literally and spun them into a torture ritual. Furthermore, the Christian influence on the saga writers could have played a role. Medieval Christian literature was replete with gruesome martyrdom stories, saints shot full of arrows, flayed alive, etc. The blood eagle in the sagas might have been inspired in part by these martyr tales, blending pagan revenge with lurid details meant to shock and appall, much like a saint's torture. In fact, Frank compared the blood eagle descriptions to the story of Saint Sebastian, shot with arrows until his insides were exposed, and others, suggesting the saga writers were engaging in a bit of one-upmanship, crafting a pagan atrocity to rival anything from a martyr's legend.
The sagas speak of vengeance, sacrifice, and honor. But
other historians, however, have not been so quick to dismiss the blood eagle as pure fantasy. Some point out that the motif is consistent in multiple sources and that the ritual fits a certain psychological logic of the Viking Age. The eminent medievalist J.M. Wallace Hadrill once catalogued the supposed victims of the blood eagle: Ælla of Northumbria, Halfdan Longleg of Norway, possibly an Irish king named Mael Gwalai of Munster, and even, by some fringe interpretations, Saint Edmund of East Anglia. All these deaths occurred in the late 9th century, which intriguingly suggests that if the blood eagle happened, it was during a very specific period of Viking expansion and turmoil. The historian Alfred Smith championed the idea that the blood eagle was real, proposing that it was a form of human sacrifice to Odin in times of great need or great vengeance. Smith found it hard to believe that medieval writers simply invented all those precise anatomical details out of thin air. He also noted that the Old Norse language had a term, Blóðörn, blood eagle, implying it was a concept the Vikings recognized. To scholars like Smith, the coherence of the accounts, 2 father-avenging cases, 2 noble victims, both sacrifices to Odin, hints at a genuine, if rare, ritual that was part of Viking behavior. Perhaps extreme, perhaps very seldom performed, but not impossible. What about the science of it? Could a person really be subjected to a blood eagle as described? Modern anatomists and researchers have weighed in on this grisly question. In 2022, an interdisciplinary team of medical scientists and Viking historians conducted a detailed study of the procedure as described in the sagas medievalists.net. Using anatomical simulations, they found that while incredibly challenging, it was anatomically possible to perform the key steps, given Viking Age tools and knowledge. However, findings also underscore that the victim would not have remained alive through the whole ordeal. The moment a blade sliced open the back and severed the ribs, massive blood loss or collapsed lungs would ensure death within seconds. Medievalists.net. So the dramatic idea of the victim conscious and feeling every moment, even seeing his lungs pulled out, is likely an exaggeration. Reality, if it occurred, would have been mercifully or mercilessly shorter. Unconsciousness and death following swiftly after the most extreme cuts. This actually aligns with a point of skepticism some have raised, that it's hard to imagine even Vikings, skilled in torture though they might be, managing to keep a person alive so long in such a procedure. It seems the Blood Eagle was more spectacle than practical torture. Its impact was in what was done to the body, not in prolonging the victim's suffering for hours on end. The truth, in the end, remains elusive. No archaeological find, no skeleton, with spread ribs for instance, has confirmed a Blood Eagle to date. We rely on stories, poems, and second-hand chronicles. It's very possible that the Blood Eagle lived largely in the imagination, a kind of boogeyman tale of the Viking Age. But crucially, whether or not it was common, or even real, people of that era believed it could happen. That belief alone had consequences. The fear it instilled was real. The infamy it gave the Vikings was real. And the cultural memory it created was certainly real. The legend of the Blood Eagle influenced how victims saw their Viking captors, not just as warriors, but as men capable of seemingly supernatural cruelty. It also influenced how Vikings saw themselves, wrapping their most extreme vengeance in the mantle of religious ritual, almost as if to say, this is more than vengeance. This is destiny and sacrifice. Blood on the Ice, legacy of the Blood Eagle. For over a millennium, the Blood Eagle has remained a byword for utter brutality. Long after the Viking Age ended, the tale of this ritual killing kept its dark allure. Medieval scribes wrote of it with a mixture of horror and fascination. In modern times, it has captured popular imagination in books, TV shows, and video games, often depicted in lurid detail as the ultimate symbol of Viking savagery. Who can forget the spine-chilling scenes in which a victim's back is laid open on screen, leaving audiences recoiling in shock? The Blood Eagle has effectively become shorthand for the extremes of human cruelty, an event almost too horrific to believe, yet too compelling to ignore. But this story is not just about gore. It is about what violence meant in a certain time and place. The Vikings lived in a world where life was harsh and often short, where loyalty and vengeance were two sides of the same coin. The Blood Eagle, in all its ghastliness, illustrates a kind of brutal logic. A life for a life, a pain for a pain, amplified to epic proportions. It was meant to balance cosmic scales that had been upset by treachery or murder. In a culture that revered strength and feared disgrace, what more powerful statement could there be than to not only kill your enemy, but to make his death an offering to the gods and a spectacle for all? It was justice, theater, and holy rite wrapped together in blood. Today, we are far removed from the mindset that produced such a ritual. We look back with revulsion, but also perhaps with a morbid curiosity, trying to understand how our ancestors could conceive of something so cruel. The Blood Eagle challenges us to confront the darker aspects of human nature, the capacity for cruelty in the name of honor, the use of terror as a tool of power. And yet, it also reminds us that history is often filtered through lenses of exaggeration and myth-making. The Vikings were not only the sum of their worst deeds. They were also sailors, lawmakers, storytellers. The same saga literature that preserves the Blood Eagle also gives us beautiful poetry and profound questions about fate and courage. In the end, whether the Viking Blood Eagle was a frequently enacted ritual or a fevered legend hardly matters to the legacy it leaves. Its image has the power to make us shudder and to transport us into the icy hall of a Norse chieftain, where we can almost feel the cold and hear the screams. It stands as a testament to the extremes of vengeance. How far people will go to right a grievous wrong in a world without mercy. It also stands as a warning that when violence is given ritual sanction, it can spiral into realms almost beyond human comprehension. As the Northmen themselves might say, fear is a weapon as sharp as any sword. The Blood Eagle was fear carved in stone and flesh, a nightmare sent by the Vikings to haunt the minds of their enemies. And haunt it does, even into our modern age. If this journey into the darkest corners of Viking history fascinated or horrified you, or both, be sure to hit the like button. For more immersive dives into the dramatic and often disturbing chapters of the past, consider subscribing to our channel. We explore history's depths with unflinching eyes, from ancient rituals to epic battles. What do you think about the Viking Blood Eagle? Was it reality, myth, or something in between? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Did this story challenge your view of the Vikings, or make you grateful to live in a slightly more civilized time? We'd love to hear your perspective and any experiences or insights you'd like to share about this brutal saga of revenge. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay curious and stay safe out there. Skål!
If this journey into the darkest corners of Viking history fascinated you or unsettled you, consider leaving a like.